Welcome. Great to have you here. This is a unique moment, a moment that unites all of us. We all face anxiety and loss. We all see broken systems. We all experience the impact of the climate crisis. This is a unique moment. This is a turning point if we choose to make it one. This is a moment to reflect, to learn, to share, and to co-create. And I invite you to contribute. I ask you to contribute. I ask you to partner to fix broken systems. I ask you to join the movement so everyone can step into their change-making power. I ask you to nominate the next generation of changemakers. And I ask you to share your wisdom, your knowledge, your expertise. And I ask you to donate to support changemakers. This is our moment to fix the world. This is our moment to contribute. Today is the day, and you are the one.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our session on making health and justice systems fair and inclusive for migrants. My name is Laura Batalla, and I'm Hello Europe's migration policy representative in Brussels. Hello Europe is an initiative by Ashoka created in 2016 to identify the most powerful and proven solutions to challenges surrounding migration, integration, and refugee movements. I have the pleasure to moderate this panel discussion today and learn from these two leading social entrepreneurs working at the intersection of migration and the legal and healthcare systems. Stephen and Lisanne work in the area of migration, which is globally relevant and come from two different countries, the United States and Germany, where migration is deeply intertwined with history and current affairs, and where the responses are sometimes similar, but oftentimes are completely opposite. So expect today a rich conversation rooted in practical how-tos and insightful system change strategies. But before turning to them, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Nicole, our session coordinator, to say a few words.
Thank you, Laura, and hello everyone, and hello to the speakers again. Welcome, congratulations for becoming new Ashoka Fellows and having been elected this year. I am Nicole. I work with Ashoka in Geneva, and I work with fellows. They are my joy, and I guess today you will understand a little bit of the why I work with for selecting, supporting, and allowing for them to thrive, basically. I am excited to be here today, and as Laura said, I'll be coordinating this session. My role is to ensure that you'll get the most out of this time with our speakers. Before actually getting into the core of today's session, I'd like to pick up your brains a little bit and sense the diversity and richness of this group. In order to do so, we have prepared a little icebreaker. So let me just tell you this. An Ashoka Fellow in the US, that is Laura Enrico Soltis, runs a freedom school for undocumented students. And one of their slogans is, "Migration is beautiful." These words adorn posters, stickers, t-shirts, along with images from nature. So we were there wondering if you had to illustrate a poster with the words "migration is beautiful" for your country or your community, what animal would you feature? What animal do you connect to the idea of migration? So just post a link in the chat with the Menti pool, and we will be seeing questions live. So you can just go on there and insert your question. So there, slowly but surely, questions will come. There is a little bit of a delay. Let me just... Okay, so we have birds for now. That's great. I also wanted to share with you the actual picture and the animal that the fellow itself is featuring, and that is the butterfly, the monarch butterfly. So this fellow says that they choose the butterfly because it not only represents transformation and change, but also the natural resilience and beauty of creatures that migrate across the US-Mexico border to survive. And I think that is a very powerful image. So having that in mind, I'll hand it over to Laura again to start the conversation.
Thank you, Nicole, for this fun way to start the session. So coming back to our speakers now, let me introduce them a little better. Lisanne Knopp is improving healthcare access for migrant populations in a country where the ability to speak German is a precondition to receive immediate and appropriate medical support. She is fostering a more inclusive healthcare system through Triaphon, a low-threshold language support system for hospitals that leverages the multilingualism of Germany's migrant population. We also have with us Stephen Manning, who is building communities and legal structures that protect immigrants from the imbalance of power and otherization that create abuses in our current system. He launched the Innovation Law Lab to reimagine how immigration law is practiced and has created new structures to support immigrant defense work in communities. So now that we all know who they are, let me start with Lisanne. So Lisanne, your work is informed by the state of migration in Germany. What is important to understand about the German context, both historically as well as today?
Well, I think in Germany, I don't know why, but the view of the German society on migration often is that we are not a country of migration, but actually we have a very long history of migration. And for instance, after the Second World War, like we couldn't have built up the country again without migration. So we have a long history of migration and several generations of migrants or people with migration background. And yeah, I think that's also a very, very important resource we have in our society. And one thing we work on with Triaphon is to see like this development as a resource and a positive thing in our society, and not like just treat people who don't speak German, for instance, as like a less important type of patient or so, or ignore them in the medical healthcare system. So yeah, we are a migration country, but it's sometimes not seen like that. And actually it's like 1/4 of the population has a migration background in Germany. And like around 4 million people have a language barrier in their daily life.
Yeah, Germany is clearly the most welcoming European country, I would say, when it comes to migration. I would like to remind everyone to post their questions through the chat. I mean, as from now, this is possible, and my colleague Nicole will be collecting them and asking them to the speakers towards the end of the session. But let me come back to get to know a bit better about your journey and how you became to work where you are at the moment, because you are actually a medical doctor, and it was in the emergency room that you saw how the healthcare sector wasn't meeting the needs of a changing population. So what did you specifically observe there?
Well, I observed it in my daily life and like in several situations, but especially in the emergency room where you can't plan the contact with the patient and the medical staff. I think it's crucial to have communication. And one particular situation I experienced was when I still was an intern, and I had a 3-year-old boy and his mother. They would only speak Vietnamese, and the boy wouldn't let me examine him. So I talked to the doctors and said, like, I can't examine him and I can't talk to his mother. And the only thing we knew was that this boy was vomiting. And so the most likely thing with a vomiting child is that it has a gastroenteritis, and we took him on the ward. And
the day after the boy was dead. And actually, it turned out that the mom went to doctors for several weeks and always could just do the mimes of vomiting like this and could not communicate. And for the medical decision, it's a completely different thing if the vomiting is just for 1 day or 2 days or for some weeks. And so I thought this is such a, just actually a few sentences and such a basic communication, and that should be the least we should offer to our patients or our population that doesn't speak German, that they can communicate such basic things in the medical healthcare system. So yeah, that was one of the experiences I made. But also, I think it's very important. We work in the acute and basic communication. So we don't want to, we see ourselves as a bridge for until an on-site interpreter is there or so. And it's also very important, not only for the doctors, but also for the nurses to be able to talk to the patients. I think it sounds obvious, but it's not part of the daily life in the German medical healthcare system.
Yes, I think communication is the major obstacle that migrants and refugees face when arriving to a new country. So clearly you identified this very urgent problem, which is communication and the lack of making yourself understood in cases of emergency. So what was your solution to that? What was the system that you created in order to address this shortcoming?
Well, our solution is very simple, and we thought of a solution that we could integrate into this very stressful daily working life of the medical staff. So we thought all of them have a phone in their pocket or a phone somewhere. So we built up a network of, until now, around 150 volunteers who are bilingual, and lots of them have a medical background, but not all of them, and we train them. And so we develop an app, and they can choose whenever they have time to interpret for the medical healthcare system. And so we actually managed to cover a 24-hour shift in now 8 languages. And so the doctors can just pick any phone in the hospital, and at any time of the day, they can just dial a number, choose the language, and have someone on the loudspeaker to be able to get the basic information to really decide whether it's an emergency they have to deal with or if it's something basic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because communication is not only a matter of knowing a language, it can also be communicating about who these people are, what are their needs. I mean, what did they flee their countries, or what did they go into another country to find opportunities? So this is not only a language problem, but it's also about prejudice. So are you seeing the impact of on prejudice and perceptions of healthcare professionals? I mean, how are you dealing with this problem in your daily work?
Yeah, I think that's a big problem we have. It's very easy to have prejudices if you can't talk to the other person, and that is something I saw very frequently, that people would have prejudices and just be like, oh yeah, this person, I don't know, have any prejudices. And when we established Triaphone, for instance, in my hospital, it was for me, it was a turning point, because I could say, why don't you just talk to them? If people would have talk about their prejudices or racist comments or whatever. And I thought, and actually I saw some kind of a mind shift, which was, I think, maybe the people with those racist thoughts didn't really think about how much their mind changed through this opportunity to actually just talk to the other person. And also we also have a problem with violence in the emergency room. And there was a study saying that 37% of the cases of violence in the emergency rooms is based on misunderstandings. So that's also, one, it's such a simple solution, people just talk to each other, but it has a huge impact on preventing violence and prejudices.
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, solutions may seem simple to very complex issues. So what would be your main learnings, or what would you say to other people? What would be the learnings that you can tell them from your job? You said this is a very simple solution, but how could they apply it to the work that they do?
Well, I think, or the learning is that it actually works. In the beginning, we didn't think we would actually manage to have this 24-hour availability. And it is actually used once the medical staff is trained and told about this new opportunity to just simply call a number and be able to talk to the patient. So so the main issue is to distribute and this idea, and also to make sure that it becomes part of the system, and that we just overcome language barrier in the acute and basic communication in general.
To solve much bigger problems. I think that's a good learning. Thank you for sharing with us. Let's turn now to Stephen. You work on immigration in the United States, and the US is a country with a history of immigration and a major destination for migrants from all over the world, but also a country that is becoming increasingly close to migrants. What is important for people to understand about the historical background and current context in the US as regards migration?
Great. Thank you for that question, Laura. So the US's history is as a settler colonialist nation, which has this very layered, very rich, very violent, very complex history with immigration and migration. And we're finding ourselves right now in, I think, a space, when we just underwent an election, where migration and how we treat people, immigrants, was one of the core questions that we were, the election was based on. And that is a question that's going to be lingering here in the US for a while still, as we try to solve for how people are treated, and how what it means to belong in a place, and what it means to be able to migrate and to move to a different place and seek to belong as well. It's really complex, but it's a great question.
Thank you. And we heard about Lisanne's journey, but I was wondering, how did you find yourself working on immigration and legal reform?
It was quite literally, on this particular project with Innovation Law Lab, I was just on a rooftop with a whole bunch of other lawyers in this very fancy place in Washington, DC. And we were having hors d'oeuvres, and someone came up to me and said, "Hey, there's this secret detention center. Have you heard about it? Where they're like putting children in the desert, in the New Mexican desert." And I'm like, "Oh, that's crazy. That doesn't happen in the US. That's like, what are you talking about?" And they're like, "No, that's real." And it was just kind of like a little cocktail party, and then chat. And then that actually was real. And we did some additional investigation. And then within just about a week from that, we had a team of lawyers from Oregon. That's where I'm from, in Portland, Oregon. We had a team of lawyers in Oregon who drove down to this hidden facility, quite literally hidden facility, where children and their mothers were being detained. And that's where this project came from, is to do some power shifting, to build a structure that would enable individuals to access the legal system, to be able to defend their rights in that process.
Yeah, it's quite shocking to hear about the detention centers. Sometimes, I mean, in Europe, we also have similar ones, but it's a reality that is often not very out there, and we are not very aware of it. So coming back to the work that you're doing, the way individual asylum seekers as well as individual lawyers navigate the legal system reinforces baked-in power imbalances, and this is what you're trying to address. So could you describe some of the ways the current system as it is designed now is disempowering towards them? And secondly, what is that you're doing about it?
Can I give another brief example of like what that power imbalance looks like? So I was actually so I spend time in these centers, and I was in one of the detention centers, and my client, I'm a lawyer, and my client, she was a mother and 3 children, and she was from Central America. She had suffered really significant violence, and there was no reason why she should have been detained. She was perfectly eligible for asylum, not a danger to anyone. Her and her children should not have been incarcerated. And so under the law, I could fill out this form and make my case to the warden of the jail. And I did that. And I was trying to find the warden of the jail. And so eventually I sent a fax with my notice of like, I'm her lawyer, here's my explanation why she should be released. And I'm inside the detention center and I'm waiting, and this officer comes. And you have to imagine this scene. It's a jail for children. And so there's all these children, and they're like, I don't know, they're playing, but I don't know, it's a jail. And the officer comes through, and he's fully armored, aviator mirror glasses, and he cuts through the children and just parts them, comes up to me where I'm with mom, and he says, holds up the letter that I just sent him. So I faxed him this letter saying, like, he says, what's this? I said, oh, well, I'm explaining the law and explaining the facts, and here's how we should be released, right? Let's have a conversation about it. That's what we do. And then he takes the letter and he crumples it up and he throws it, and then he walks out of the room. And to me, and that was it. And to me, that represented like the imbalance of power. Here was the law. We all could read the law. We all could see the law. It was all written down. There's no dispute about what the law was. But he was able to just be unaccountable to the law because we had no power. And so he could just literally throw it away. And so what we decided to do for these brave people who dare to move across the face of the earth, we needed to have a system to be able to say like, no, that's not right. And so we took lawyers and we studied what lawyers do. And we looked at all of the mundane things. Lawyers often come to cases thinking that each case is unique, just like maybe a doctor, I don't know, goes to every heart. Every heart is unique, but there are things that we learn and we do all the time, even in all our legal cases. And so we created a technology and a system that would do those things, those highly repeatable tasks, to allow the lawyer to sort of focus on their magic. And by letting the lawyer focus on their magic in winning cases and let the technology guide the lawyer going forward, we could do that with one lawyer, and then we could do that with hundreds of lawyers. And soon we could do that with thousands of lawyers. And so that's what we do. So we take technology, law, and organizing and leverage them together to fight for immigrant and refugee rights.
I guess.
Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that was actually very graphic and amazing to listen to. I think this way it's easier for you to measure the success. No, I mean, you mentioned already a couple of stories that even didn't end well, but I'm sure you can also share one which ended in a success. I mean, all this technology put together with the work of lawyers, how it has brought success in bringing cases to justice and to really have justice be made.
So there was time, if it wasn't yesterday, and this time of pandemic, it feels like if it wasn't yesterday, it was 10,000 years ago. Like last year or pre-pandemic, they'd opened up a detention center here, not too far from where I live. And they were holding mostly men from South Asia, who were seeking asylum, or from Central America in this detention center, completely incommunicado. So they couldn't call out, No one knew they were there. And using our technology and the organizing structures and bringing lawyers in, we were actually able to win 100% of those cases. So everyone who the government, they'd all been ordered deported, they'd all been deemed like ineligible and non-existent under US asylum law. And we reversed that for 100% of them. We had more than 1,000 people participate in that movement. And shut down that they no longer hold anyone at that detention center anymore. So like Oregon right now is one of the few states in the United States that does not have a site for immigrant detention.
That's very impressive to hear. Thank you for sharing. And before going into a more lively discussion between the two of you, I would also like to ask you about the current context in the US about racism and xenophobia and nationalism. We've seen in the run-up to the US elections how the Black Lives Matter movement has again come to the fore, and we've seen a lot of injustice around this. So do you expect this is gonna change anytime soon, or is it really impacting the work you do in a way? Are you hopeful in any way about it?
The intersectionality for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, the issues that they face each day within so many, if not most of our legal structures in the United States are centered on whiteness and are centered on concepts of white supremacy. And that immigration, and particularly for immigrants from communities of color, that racism, systemic racism, confronting a legal structure, like immigration law is based on the concept of you are not us, like you are different from us. And that using that framework of white supremacy and racism and applying it to someone whose legal rights are already defined to be like almost zero because you're not us, creates for a very volatile mix. And that's really hard, but I'm also really hopeful because I think in the long run, sorry, I'm gonna cry, because I think in the long run, we're people, and people will, when you're a family, your friend or a neighbor, when you see that humanity, you can actually begin to change your structures. And we're seeing that, right? We just had it was a very challenging election, but it was a positive result.
We hope about that this will lead to better times in the future. I would like to try to do an experiment now. I don't know if this will work, but having listened to both of you and being a little bit more familiar about how migration is seen in both countries, if I would ask you now to keep doing the work that you're doing the same way, but you would swap locations so that you would work in the other's country, what do you think would be the biggest differences? Or would it be harder for you to operate in that other context? Would it be easier? What differences would you see? I mean, you can apply this to Europe in general, not only Germany, maybe, and the US as a whole, let's say. Anyone would like to start? Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me the answer is quite simple because I got the idea of Triaphone from the US. I worked in a hospital in New York, and there they had those telephones, and they have, I know in the US you have big companies doing things like this with call centers and so on. So you have much more infrastructure, and I felt like obviously the US is I know in the medical care, it seemed to me that it was in the routine of the medical staff to call an interpreter if you have a language barrier. And that's a difference to Germany. Here you would just be like, oh yeah, well, he doesn't speak my language, so I'll just do mimes or try Google Translate or whatever. But it's more like
also an imbalance of power, like to quote you, Stephen. I think it's the same topic we are on. And I think also to this, imbalance of power, I think it's a very important thing that the group we try to help with our solutions doesn't really have a voice in the public, at least in Germany. Like no one would raise their voice because they are not heard in medical healthcare system because, obviously they can't speak the same. They can't speak German. Yeah, sorry, I got lost my track. But oh no, yeah, and I think it would be much harder to bring like this interpreting service in the healthcare system, because it's like, yeah, you have a general problem with like making healthcare available to like the whole population. So I think in that term, it would be easier in Germany, but our culture is less open to overcome language barriers.
Thank you. What about you, Stephen?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And Lisanna, I really liked and appreciated your answer. Because like the layered system, like in the US, like the healthcare system is totally messed up. We don't actually have universal access to healthcare. And so like universal access to language services, to healthcare, like that's a really complicated thing, but then there's still pieces where it can be solved. I often, like, I would say like maybe like 5 years ago, like as a student in of immigration and migration, I would often look to Europe to try to show folks here, hey, that's how you do it. And I think that changed. And I think because of the US, we're very much, we use the deportation power all the time, really expansively, like a deportation nation. But Europe didn't, right? But that began to change. And that Europe is now, I think, modeling some of our less good practices. And if to do this project or like this in Europe or in Germany, I think the changes would have to, I'd be super excited to think that through, because I think there is a lot of interventions that could be done in sort of what this massive collaborative representational space. And that the challenge is going to really be about the different refugee convention structures from country to country, and the treaty obligations within the sort of the European bloc. But yeah, it would be super, super exciting to try to think that through.
Yeah, I might pick up your brains later on how would you envisage this, any changes in the migration field, for instance, in the work that you're doing. But let me ask you now about a bit more about the inequalities that you face and the barriers that you face in the work that you do. It's clear, and you have showed that working to make systems actually work, and by ensuring more people are able to and confident to seek out medical care, or in seeing the full legal process carried out, you have demonstrated that. But these systems, as you were explaining earlier, are not always designed for everyone. So did you find unlikely allies on your way or pushbacks in making these systems actually serve the disenfranchised? I mean, what would you say have been your best allies and the major obstacles that you have found along the way?
Do you want to take it, Lisanna?
Okay. I think I think the biggest problems we face is like the routines that are so unfortunately established in the healthcare system. And as we have an increase of profit-run healthcare system, or like hospitals that are run for profit, the daily working life is like very, very short in time and very stressful. And that's a big topic in Germany, that like the medical staff is like very stressed, and we have a lack of nurses for that reason, and so on. So it's a working field where it's very difficult to change something. And also, I think that also makes it more likely that those maybe a racist behavior would develop, although it's not originally meant that way, but they would just be like, okay, well, he can't speak my language, so I'll just, I don't know, do whatever. And obviously it's very inhuman to do that. But so yeah, we have to face like some very inhuman routines in the daily working life of medical staff. And usually we have like some people in that system who still have this idea of like bringing medical staff and the patients on eye level and like fight against this imbalance of power. And so they usually help us to integrate our system into the hospital. And also we see, I think, yeah, the most challenging thing is to really integrate it into the routine of the medical staff. So we see the hospital, we founded Triaphone 3 years ago, and we have the clinic that started first with Triaphone. They have an increase of calls to our hotline by 50 calls per month per year. So they still increase a lot in the calls, and we see that we still get more and more into the routines of that clinic, which is very interesting, but it's a long way.
Thank you.
There's yeah, that's really intriguing to think about that concept. In the U.S., the deportation system is it's an industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. A lot of money gets made off the misery of other people, and that is, people make money off of it, and it's embedded in communities. People there's industries that support it. It's this thing that if you to attack it, it's a business model. To attack it, you have to actually figure out what other people do. Like if you're what do guards do? What do people who make things that then support the incarceration of others, sort of the goods, like the food producers? All those people need to be redirected, or that the production or what they bring forth into the world has to be rethought. And we think about how we measure power, and we actually we use the Foucaultian sort of power relationship theory. So that power flows between institutions, and in general, we would measure that with money here in the US. And one of the interesting allies we've had is actually that same system. Using public dollars here in Oregon, we have, through the pandemic, we have actually created the US's largest mass mutual aid system to provide immigrant assistance to immigrants who've been excluded from our federal system, so our federal welfare social safety system, through the pandemic. We've now recreated the largest mass mutual aid system using similar dollars as a measure for power. So that's wasn't something that came about totally driven by the impacted community, totally constructed and implemented, and it's been really amazing to see that success.
It does sound like a big success. I hear that we are receiving some questions from the audience, so I would like to give them the opportunity to ask them, maybe not directly, but through Nicole. So I will save my last question to you to the end, but let's engage a bit with our participants now.
Yes, thank you, Laura. There are some questions that are coming in through the chat. So let me just first connect to what you were saying just now, Stephen. So you were talking about the multi-million actually traffic of money that there is behind how immigration is tackled. And we see that in Europe massively also. And I am from Italy, and in Italy as well, it is a really, really big problem. It actually has been shown that it actually gives more money than the drug traffic. So it's huge. And people in the chat were therefore wondering, how do how do you see these players being redirected, what their role could be? And also like tied into that and the practical side of things is in migration, we see that there are many categorizations of migrants that you can make, right? So there are like the asylum seeker and refugees, there are internally displaced people and the so-called economic migrants. How can we practically help all of those and not only refugees? And if you do that in your work?
Great. So that, of course, is the multi-million-dollar question, and I don't have that answer. But if someone does, like that's what we should talk about. I can give an example that I think on a much smaller scale. So maybe it's just like a couple $1 million. There was a facility here in Oregon that was making money off of immigrant detention, and it was a rural facility in rural Oregon, and that community relied on it. And like, so there were jobs in the community because people worked at the facility. There were people who who produced the food that was then used in the facility. And so they had a livelihood, and then their business employed people, and then those people then spent money in the community. So it was like this interconnected woven. And so to shut down the detention system there would have meant that a lot of people would have lost jobs. And so there was political resistance in an odd way, because everyone believed like, yeah, it's right, we need to shut it down because that's wrong, but I need to stay alive. I have kids, like, so it was like this thing. And so what we did is we just replaced the funding stream. We said, shut down this funding. So it took a while. So it was like a multi-year effort. Shut down the immigrant misery funding stream, so no more detention. And then let's actually replace that with mental health services. So here's a new funding stream that's going to come in from the state, from public dollars, for mental health services for individuals. So we brought in different professionals who would then still use those spaces. And so the employment level will remain at relatively the same. And then people in the same amount of dollars will still continue to flow into the community. So that was one way of looking at an actual replacement. How you would scale that up, I don't know.
Thank you. Lisanne, do you have, maybe is your service directly to refugees in particular or to migrants in general? And if so, like what ideas do you have that can allow us to practically provide or enlarge those rights to migrants in general?
No, our service is directed to everyone who has a language barrier, and actually we also have some subcultures in Germany due to our history of migration. For instance, I know like very few people know that, but in Berlin we have also quite big Vietnamese subculture, and I'm always surprised like how many people we have there who don't speak German. And I think that's another thing we would have to address as a society to make sure that everyone gets access to learning our language. But I think that's not a problem that should be solved in the acute medical care. But that's like, and that shouldn't be the situation where we say, well, you better should have learned German, so then you would get treated. So yeah, we understand ourselves like everyone should get the same access and the same treatment in the acute and basic medical care. And so we want to make sure that they get the care they need. And so we address everyone with the language barrier. And it's definitely not like just the recent refugees, but sometimes they have been in Germany for decades, but they don't speak our language.
It is a great point. Indeed, it's not just when you arrive in a country that integration happens right away, you know?
And that's another big topic that someone should maybe address, and but not ours until now.
Indeed. There are also many questions actually around how it all started for you. And it is actually to see that you both ended up in this field because of a personal experience you had, right? So Lisanne, for you, it was being personally facing the issues of people who didn't have access to healthcare in Germany. And for you, Stephen, it was the news of the secret detention center. So it's mind-blowing actually how direct experiences can pick our brains and make us discover things and want to engage with them personally. Also, many people in the chat said that their own interest in migration was sparked from an experience that they directly had. The question here is, do you think that is actually a prerequisite to engage with migration, especially given the political discourse that we're in now, that it is so toxic and migration is always seen as a very negative force? Do you think that direct experience is so important, or how do you see the role of journalism in depicting migration in your work?
Yeah, so should I start again?
Whoever wants.
Sorry. Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because first of all, in the beginning, I never thought that we would actually manage to cover this 24-hour shift system for 8 languages. And we actually not just have one person on call every second, but we have at least 2 people on call every second, 24 hours. So it's very impressive, like this, this engagement of our community. And the main reason for that is that most of them are like 2nd-generation immigrants. And as being children, they were in exactly that situation, that being a child, they had to translate for their parents when they went to the doctor, or I don't know, whatever they did. And it's, well, of course, a child can't translate as accurate as an adult. And also it's like, it's not the right situation to be in. But like most of, nearly all of the people who, help us with Triathlon, they have a connection to this topic. And I think that's probably also a main problem we face, that in the area of politicians or like decision makers, there are few people who have a personal connection to that topic. So it's, I'm really, I don't know, I can't understand why also so many of my colleagues or people working as medical staff, like they just, and they sometimes really don't see the problem, and they don't see that there's, I hear a lot of times like, well, it works somehow always. Like I do mimes and like it will help, it will work somehow. And that's, I feel like, this topic isn't really present in the heads of the people who make the big decisions in our society. So we have to change that.
Toxicity can exist. I mean, I think that's absolutely correct. And toxicity can exist in like sort of the vague big space. But I think when you get down to, at least my experiences get down to like the personal level, toxicity is like, it's a different, like, it's actually, I don't know that, like when you're dealing with when you have the personal connection and it's about your family, friends, and neighbors, it's a conversation. Or it could be a conversation. And when it's one-on-one or family to family or neighbor to neighbor, that the conversation can change. And so do you need to have a personal connection to engage in this work? I don't think so. I think like we need to all step in and step up to the work. We have to, if we're stepping in and stepping up without a personal connection, we should educate ourselves before we step in and step up. That could be part of the process. And our work, we try to make sure that the reason lawyers, like when they participate in our work, that obviously they're participating in the work because we all want to feel good about ourselves and we want to do good. But the reason why we're doing the work, that the lawyer comes, we're just very clear. When you come to this work, we want you to have a good experience, but your good experience is not the reason why we do this. That the reason why we do this is actually to create the system change, and what you're bringing are valuable skills that we're going to use as tools. And are you okay with that? And if they're okay with that, then yes, right, absolutely step in, step up.
Thank you. I'll hand it over to Laura just in time for our last question. Yes, thank you.
Yes, it is somehow related to what you were saying, and I like what Lisanne said about politicians maybe not having personal connections or having seen the migration phenomenon from a close distance somehow. So the last question would be, I know that, well, maybe in the case of Stephen, maybe he works more directly with policymakers or government. But if you could, for instance, convey a message to them, what would it be? I mean, what one change would positively impact the work that you're doing? And it could also be what would you change in the area that you're working around migration to make the system work better?
Do you want me to go first, and we'll leave it up?
No, go first.
I would say two things. So one, that you have to free the people to promote our collective prosperity, and if that's sort of the central attribute of what the policy should embody, that by allowing people to be free to migrate where they need to be where they want to call home. And by doing that, you're unleashing a lot of power and a lot of ability to create collective prosperity where we can all win. So that would be the one piece that I would like to see policy embody.
Wow, that sounds very nice. Well, I think it's also, again, a very simple thing. We agree on for all the other people in our country that they all should have an equal access and treatment in acute and basic medical care. And there's just one group that is forgotten. And yeah, I think it's just, actually, I think those decision makers, it's a common sense that everyone should have the same access, but they just forgot about this group. And I would like to remind them that there is a group they still forgot, and I would like to encourage them to make this system, a system like Triafon, it could be any other system as well, part of the public healthcare system. So.
Yeah, I think both demands are legitimate. I hope that we will be seeing them implemented. Maybe I don't know how you feel about the near future, especially in the US with the change of administration, whether you're hopeful in that regard. In Germany, politics look a bit more complicated with Merkel maybe leaving office next year. We will see, but still, I think Germany is still calling the shots when it comes to migration at the European level. And we've seen very recently the so-called new pact on migration and asylum that the European Commission has unveiled after months of consultations with the different member states and different actors, civil society included. We were happy as Hello Europe to contribute with our vision for what a future migration system would look like. But unfortunately, I think everyone has been somehow disappointed to see that not much has changed with regards to where Europe was 5 years ago when the so-called refugee crisis hit our continent. I call it so-called because, of course, I think there has always been the problem that it has been portrayed as a crisis, when in reality it was a management crisis, but it was not the problem of refugees trying to come to Europe. I mean, migration is and will continue to be a global phenomenon, and it's an existing part of our societies. I think Germany and the US are both multicultural countries, and this enriches a lot their societies. We've seen how COVID has not only shaken the foundations of our society, but also how it has put at the forefront of the response migrants themselves, who probably in the health sector in Germany are at the forefront providing health as well, curement and treatment to other people. So we have we need to put that more into value in our future society. So this, I think, with the contributions of both of you, I think you are in your respective countries, but also giving examples and enlightening those participants that join us today to also try to seek and empower other people by establishing their own initiatives on migration and asylum. So I would like to slowly wrap up our discussion as the hour is coming to an end faster than expected. But I would like to especially, thank all the participants, but especially the speakers that we had today for this insightful and exciting discussion that we had. And also a big thanks to Nicole for having run everything so smoothly. So before we all head off to the next session, I would like to take a moment to reflect on the relevance and the insights that we gained in today's session, which I believe are applicable not only to the migration field, but to many other societal fields, especially in today's world that we are living in this uncertainty. I think the cases of Stephen, as well as Lisanne, I think clearly show and demonstrate how our changemaker, our Ashoka Fellows, are proving throughout this summit that they are well equipped to cope with the shocks like the COVID-19 pandemic. So in the absence of other all-encompassing solutions coming from governments, from the private sector, from other citizen-led initiatives, I think it is safe to say that social innovation is probably the missing key needed to unlock these solutions for the future. So we now have the opportunity to rethink and change the way our society works. And as it was proven today, systems change is possible, and just one individual can help achieve it. So as we all heard at the beginning from the video from Marie Ringler, our colleague at the beginning of this session, now it is time to act, and we believe Ashoka is well positioned to make your contribution matter. So please consider donating if you have the resources, or talk to us in the Ashoka booth that you will find on the main platform. If you see an opportunity to start a partnership with us, with the fellows present today, but any other sessions that you will be joining throughout this 3 days journey, or nominate as well candidates, individuals that you know who could potentially become Ashoka Fellows, you will find a nomination chat for that. And if you want to continue the conversation on migration, feel free to contact the speakers directly on the page of the session. And I think Nicole will be sharing now a couple of links so that you can contact them directly. Or you could also engage with us at Hello Europe to find out more about the work that we are doing, mostly now concentrated in European countries, but we are expanding. We have started operating now in Argentina, and we might be as well expanding to Northern America. So feel free to reach out. As I said, it was a pleasure for me to share this 1 hour with you and to learn from all these insights and innovations that you are implementing in the field. And thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the summit.
Thank you.